This video was originally presented as a Zoom gathering by Tibet House US, Menla Online, and the Foundation for the Sacred Stream. To learn more, please visit the Menla website at menla.org.
And shamanism. And in order to understand shamanism, we have to understand that would be 95% of the cultures that have ever been on the planet. And the reason for this is that most of these cultures are actually quite close to the earth. And the people have lived in definitely greater harmony with the earth than we do now. And the presence of the natural processes has been much more immediate in those cultures. And if we go by the reckoning of time with Australian Aboriginal oral history, we would say that this way of working with the earth's wisdom in different cultures, certainly around Australia, but also around the world, has been happening since about 150,000 years ago. So it's a very, very ancient practice. And of course, in some places on the planet, the cultures are not that old. But one of the striking things that you find about shamanic practice is that it is practiced in a fairly similar way across the globe. And you can have the cultural trappings that would be a bit different. You know, if you're living in a jungle, you're going to have different types of implements than you would have if you're living in a desert, or if you're living in, you know, an Arctic environment, you're going to have different kinds of implements than you would have with an environment that is woodland forest, for instance. So the cultural trappings can be different, but one of the primary things that is quite similar to shamanic practice the world over is the emphasis on working on subtle levels of experience. And in earth-based wisdom systems, this is often called the level of spirit. And at the level of spirit, or at the level of energy, the processes that people engage in when interacting with the wisdom of the earth are quite similar. And I'd like to talk to you about those this evening. But I'd like to first talk about what a shaman's role is in the different cultural environments that they might be found. So the shaman is, let's talk first about the root of the word shaman. It's a Tungus word from a Mongolian language in northern Siberia. And it means he or she who knows. And what the person knows is about how this unseen world, this world of spirit, this world of energy, this world of subtle experience is related to the world of the material, to the physical world, and understands how phenomenon passes from the seen to the unseen, and how phenomenon passes from the unseen to the seen. And so now this word shaman is a word that we tend to use now in English for medicine people or wisdom holders or elders or healers or experts or knowledge holders. These are all the different names that you hear that are used to refer to a person who is functioning as a shamanic practitioner in the culture in which they reside. But we tend to use this word shaman to refer to the medicine people in all different cultural environments. And so let's talk about, you know, a little bit more about what the shaman knows. And in these cultural environments, shamans would be in charge of doctoring, ministry, ceremony creation, mediation, problem solving, working with the spirits of the dead, providing general services that have to do with the interface with the unseen to the community, such as divination, for instance. So you have in different cultural environments, you might have multiple shamanic practitioners. One may be focusing on working with plants, another and healing with plants. Another may be focused on working with the spirits of the dead and helping those who have passed come to resolution. And there's, also situations where the shamanic practitioner may do all of those different functions for the community. Just one practitioner might. So it really depends on the environment, the cultural environment, on how many shamans there are and what their duties are in particular to them. But all of these processes are covered by the shamanic practitioner in their service to the community where they live. So how do they do this? How do they establish relationships with the unseen? And how do they bring the power of those relationships to bear on the duties that they provide for the community? So let's start with the natural environment itself. So in almost all shamanic cultures, I haven't found one yet. I have an academic degree in cultural anthropology, so I've studied many different cultures from an academic point of view. And I've also worked with different shamanic practitioners in the field from a lot of different cultures. And I haven't worked with every single culture. I don't know every single practice, but I haven't found a culture that did not view the natural world as a source of wisdom and as a source of power. And within that view is the understanding that a great deal of that power and a great deal of that wisdom is actually unseen. And so you have the trees, you have the lake, you have the bear, and these are manifesting in the natural world, but it's understood that there is also an unseen power that belongs to the bear, that belongs to the lake, that belongs to the trees. And that unseen power is the power that the shamans are working with to understand what the earth has to offer in terms of wisdom and guidance. And the way that shamanic practitioners establish relationships with those unseen powers are varied. You can have, and again, it changes from culture to culture. You can have practices where there's a lot of dancing to the point where, you might be, like dervishes and some of the Middle Eastern cultures. You have this practice of spinning that will alter the state of awareness, which is a leftover from the shamanic practices that were there before Islam came. And you might have singing, or you may have the use of psychotropic plants. These are plants that have qualities that alter a person's state of awareness. And in that altering of that state of awareness, the world of spirit or the world of energy opens. And you have also quite commonly something called the shamanic journey, which is another way of altering the state of awareness so that the unseen powers of the natural world can be perceived. So let's just take a moment and talk about the conscious mind state of awareness that we are encountering one another in right now, and then and contrast that with the altered state of awareness that shamans enter into in order to be able to perceive the subtle energies of the unseen within the natural world. So this state of consciousness is a conscious mind reality. It's characterized by problem solving, logic. It filters, this state of mind that we're in right now tends to filter things that might disorganize it. And it tends to be very focused on being vigilant and keeping things organized. And that's very helpful given the fact that we're roaring through space, basically naked on a piece of rock at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I don't know the exact number of miles an hour that the Earth is traveling, but it's a lot. So having some kind of consciousness or awareness that helps you navigate this complex state of affairs is very helpful. But because of that filtering quality, it will tend to filter out aspects of our experience that can actually be valuable. They may not just be disorganizing. And so we see the work with the journey and the work with psychotropic plants, the work with dance or singing as a way to open those filters and allow the larger psyche to participate, the larger experience of reality to participate as we move into that altered state of awareness that includes things like dreaming and includes things like spontaneous visionary experience and includes things like memories that we may have forgotten or ways of being that we have stepped away from. And as these worlds open to the shamanic practitioner, their ability to perceive the subtle energies lying behind the physical forms of material reality increases. And their ability to establish relationships with those unseen powers that in shamanic practice are called helping spirits increases. Let me just have a drink of water. Thank you, sorry. So, actually I might have to have a lozenge. I've been doing a lot of teaching, so my voice is a little rusty. We get it a little rough, sorry. Be right there. Okay. So let's talk about the way that shamans establish relationship with these helping spirits. That is called the shamanic journey. Now, the shamanic journey is a process of moving into this altered state of awareness with the help of something called a sonic driver. And that might be a rattle, which is shaken in a repetitive way at a repetitive beat, or it could be something like a drum. And that repetitive sound helps focus the journeyer into this altered state of awareness where an inner cosmography opens. And that inner cosmography is described in similar terms, not exactly the same terms, but in similar terms by shamanic practitioners the world over. And in some traditions, you have this idea of a three-part world where you have an upper world that holds an inner cosmography that mimics the exterior world. So the upper world is the world behind the sky. The middle world is the world behind where we are right here on the surface of the earth. And the lower world is the world below the earth, that is just below the earth, just behind the earth under our feet. Now, not all traditions have this idea of a three-part world, but some traditions only work with an upper world, or they may not make any distinguishing characteristics between worlds. They're just simply moving in the spirit world, is what they would say. Now, when I teach the shamanic journey, I do tend to teach it within the paradigm of the three-part world, just because it is organizing and just because it is helpful to have a kind of map when you are working in this way that is unfamiliar to most people. So practitioners would go to the upper world or to the lower world, and at the beginning of the practice. And in shamanic practice, the way that I teach it and the way that has been practiced for many, many thousands of years in this paradigm, only compassionate beings are found in the upper and lower worlds. So we work primarily with helping spirits, with compassionate spirits at the beginning, establishing relationships by entering into this inner cosmography through places in nature that are known to us. And I'll be showing you how to do this tomorrow. And on Sunday, where we will be entering into the lower world and establishing relationships with spirits, helping spirits in the form of nature, and where we will be going to the upper world and creating relationships with helping spirit there, so that you will understand better this inner cosmography that we're just referring to right now. And I will also teach you how to ask questions once you've established the relationship with the guide or the teacher or the helping spirit. I kind of use those three words interchangeably. Then you will be able to ask questions and interpret questions as you are trying to solve problems. And the shamanic journey, and the way that we work with it in applied shamanism, is a little bit different than the way we might work with it in typical shamanic practice, although I do teach both methods. And I'll talk more about the differences between traditional practice with the journey and applied shamanic practice with the journey in a bit. But I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about how the journey supports other traditional practices within shamanic practice. So once the practitioner has established a relationship with a helping spirit, they would then be given initiatory processes, they would be given challenges, they would be given some kind of guidance from those helping spirits about how to develop themselves, or how to form a stronger relationship with different forms of power so that they can accomplish their goals more fully. And it is one of the tasks of the shamanic practitioner to be able to establish a strong enough relationship with a helping spirit so that the practitioner can actually become what is often called a hollow bone, or like a channel for that helping spirit to move through the shamanic practitioner into ordinary reality and to help the shamanic practitioner accomplish their goals. And the truth is, when a person is working shamanically, they are rarely doing the work. Their job is to be able to create a container for the power of the helping spirits to be able to accomplish the tasks that the shaman is asked to do. So I'd like to focus on some of the tasks that a shamanic practitioner might be asked to perform as they are serving the community. And I'd like to focus on healing practices. As I mentioned, shamans might be asked to do divinations, they might be asked to do mediations, they might be asked to solve problems, they might be asked to, again, guide the souls of the dead. But one of the primary things that shamans do in the cultures where they work is to offer healing. And they do this through the establishment of relationships with helping spirits through the shamanic journey, or through opening their minds and hearts with psychotropic plants, or by dancing or singing. And so I'd like to talk about, in just a moment, I'd like to talk about those different healing practices, especially ones that are common to to many different cultures. But before I start speaking about those practices, I thought I might see if anyone had any questions about the shamanic journey itself.
So Isa, we did have one question just in the Q&A there. And it is, can you please talk about plant medicine and wisdom and how shamans use plant teachers to heal and support communities?
Oh, I could talk about that forever. So in terms of plant medicine, you have different cultures that have more of a focus on working with different types of plants to open the world of spirit. And of course, that generally is dependent on the plants that grow there in the place where the culture is. And so just to kind of talk a little bit about some of the plant medicines that are common in some parts of the world. Probably the most common is the Psilocybin mushroom, which grows on all continents. And it's a mushroom that has psychoactive properties that open the person's awareness to their own knowledge and their own experience that they may not have fully metabolized or integrated into their awareness. That can be very helpful, and it can also be a little bit startling. But one of the things that we do here at the Sacred Stream is we have a whole program on helping people learn how to help other people integrate plant medicine's experiences. So with integration, the experiences with plant medicine can be very fruitful. And so psilocybin is found around the world. You also have different cactuses that are found particularly in the southwest of North America and in Central America, such as San Pedro or peyote that contain mescaline. And then, of course, you have in South America, in the Amazon basin in particular, you have something called ayahuasca, which is a combination of different plants to create a tea that has a very strong connection with the biochemistry of the human body, and tends to open awareness in a very profound way. And then you have iboga, which is a plant that grows in Africa that is used particularly in West Africa and which is also used now throughout the world. And it doesn't grow throughout the world, but it grows in Africa. And then you have a whole series of plants that are sort of like, I call them ordeal plants, where they send you through an ordeal, just of survival, so that the awareness that you have at the end of it is that you're alive and thank God. So that would be things like datura or morning glory or other types of plants that are a little bit harsher on the biochemistry of the human body. So this is sort of a quick tour of the different types of, and there's many, many other types of plants that are used. And in general, when the plants are ingested, it's understood that the wisdom that's coming through is the spirit of the plant from a shamanic perspective. And the shaman will often, in many cultures, it's only the shamans that ingest the plants. In other cultures, shamans will help other people in the community ingest plants and integrate their experience, hopefully. And then in some cultures, you have the whole culture centered around the ingestion of the plant medicines, and everyone is an expert on them, such as the Huichol culture in northern Mexico. So there's some information about plants and plant medicines and how they work. And I can answer more questions if you like. But
Yeah, so we got three more. One coming in through the chat.
Okay.
Will you explain the shamanic healing process?
Yes, I'm getting ready to do that extensively.
Perfect. All right, so we'll save that for a little later time and we'll go to the next one. Could you speak to some of the types of initiatory phenomenon that occur in shamanic cultures, particularly curious about parallels to psychotic disorders, the transpersonal crisis, etc., and also curious about the types of beings that may emerge during this part of the journey?
Okay, that's a big question. Okay, so one of the calls to the path is to the shamanic path is often an initiation process. And of course, what an initiation is it is a process whereby old forms or forms of the status quo of the moment are challenged by new processes. And so a very classic kind of shamanic initiatory process at the beginning of the path is where a person's ordinary waking consciousness is overrun by a visionary experience. And from a shamanic perspective, this is considered to be the spirit world entering into the ordinary world. And the fact that the person is able to perceive the spirit world and to have these visions is considered an indication that this person is probably having a shamanic initiation, and they must be taken into the fold of the older shamanic practitioners to go through more initiatory processes in order to be able to hold and integrate, for instance, their visionary capacity. Or they might also have a strong dream where they would report the dream and be recognized as a shamanic practitioner for their ability to dream. And then the strong dream would be considered the initiation. And there's many other ways, including calamity, disease, different types of initiatory processes where the person has to change radically. And they have to learn how to move through that change and in many cases heal, which puts them in a position to be able to know how to heal other people. So from a psychologist's point of view, when you see something like that visionary experience, which often comes at the time of puberty or just shortly thereafter, they call this a psychotic break because it is the way they explain it. It's the paradigm that they have. They pathologize it. This isn't normal. No, it's not normal, but it doesn't mean that there's a pathology to it. And I mean, it could be that someone is perhaps a little bit mentally unstable, or it could mean that someone is expanding their consciousness and their awareness to include other possibilities, and that's making them a little unsteady. So you have to kind of navigate your way through that. And then in terms of, and you know, I've worked with, you know, you may not know this, but I've developed a counseling process called depth hypnosis. It's DEPTH, not death hypnosis. A lot of people think it's death. It's depth hypnosis, and it's actually it combines many principles of shamanic healing with Buddhist perspectives on healing, with and working with energy medicine processes, transpersonal psychology, and hypnosis processes. So we really bring all these different ancient ways of knowing together in a very modern way, and apply that wisdom in a completely different way in order to meet the needs of modern people. And I have taken so many teenagers, you know, age 11 through 21 is the time where this usually happens. It can also happen a lot in midlife crisis around 45. It can happen anytime. But I've taken so many people through these initiatory processes and really kind of defended their right to explore this larger world without being pathologized. And there are some people who have had some kind of mental problems, but most have not. And they just needed help synthesizing and metabolizing their experience. Now, in terms of asking, you know, what kind of spirits tend to come through in those situations, I've been pretty careful in this talk to not talk about other types of spirits other than helping spirits or compassionate spirits. Now, in shamanic practice, of course, there are all types of beings that the shaman would interact with on the behalf of the people that they serve. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But there are beings in the middle world, where we are here, in the non-ordinary aspect of the middle world, that are not compassionate in nature, and that do have agendas that may not be the best for those around them. And of course, we already know that because we are members of the ordinary aspect of the middle world, and there are beings that fit that description that we encounter, unfortunately, on a regular basis. So those kinds of beings may be present and may come through the opening in the psyche that happens when a person has a visionary experience, or what psychologists would call a psychotic break. But often there are beings that are quite compassionate in nature and provide guidance and become mentors to the person, and that is the more common thing.
All right. Did you want to take a few more questions, or did you want to press on with your talk?
Let's take another question. Yeah.
One more? Okay. So Ingrid asked, can there be authentic shamanic work in cultures that have not maintained their indigenous practice, or would that be considered inorganic?
Well, one of the terrible tragedies that has occurred as a result of the genocide of Native peoples around the globe is that many of the practices have been lost. And one of the things that I seek to do is when I'm teaching is to try to distill some of the practices that are common to a lot of different cultures and strip them of their cultural trappings. That is what applied shamanism is. It's not because we don't respect and honor the indigenous ways of being, but it's because we don't want to, inappropriately take from their cultures. And in any case, many of the practices have already died in those cultural environments. So by taking a distillation and having it be sort of culture-free as possible, then those practices can be imported back into cultural environments where the practices have been lost without feeling invasive or inappropriate or inorganic. Because as I mentioned, there are so many practices that are similar across different cultures that by importing them back in without any cultural trapping and letting people create their own ceremony and understanding around it, you can have a renaissance of practice. And I have participated in that, and it's a very fulfilling kind of process, but it's certainly very organic when we do that. One more question.
One more. Perfect. Is it possible to receive wisdom from the spirit of the plant without ingestion?
Absolutely. And in the plant medicine, we have a whole program on insight integration of plant medicine. And I spend a very long time with my students, helping them develop relationships with plants that are not psychotropic in nature, so that they begin to understand the intelligence of plants. And you can actually, for instance, you could journey to the spirit of a plant to understand its nature without ingesting the plant. Or you can sit and sit with a plant over a period of hours and let it reveal itself to you as you are in an altered state. These are and it's important. I think one of the big issues that I have with the current renaissance in plant medicine, which I think is wonderful because I do think it is a path to knowledge, but one of the issues that I have is that people approach the plants like just consuming them. We're just going to consume the plants, rather than understanding this method of working with the plants and ingesting these plants to have visionary experience comes out of a much larger practice, a much larger shamanic practice of attuning to the powers of nature and attuning particularly to the powers of plants. And I always tell my students, there's nothing that you can't do with the journey. There's nothing that you can't do with a plant medicine journey that you can't do with the shamanic journey. You don't need to alter your state of awareness with a psychotropic plant in order to understand it. Okay, so let's head on and talk a little bit about some of the healing practices. I'll come back to the other questions, but I thought it might be helpful to spend a little bit of time talking about some healing practices where the shamanic journey is employed in order to help heal people. And I'm going to be talking about these practices and the methodology from a traditional point of view and also from applied shamanic point of view, because again, the big difference between applied shamanism, which is something that I've developed, and traditional shamanism is that it is applied to the modern environment. And modern people have very different problems than people living in traditional societies where they are close to the earth and where there is not a fabric of society that has been rendered, rendered asunder the way that our fabric of society has been. And so we work with the journey and with healing processes from shamanism generally differently in order to be able to help modern people with kind of confronting this terrible calamity that we are all confronting, which is a result of the war that our society has waged on the earth for the last 1,000 years, right? So this latest epidemic is just one symptom of that. And so, we have really different types of emotional and mental issues. And we also have a lack of connection and a lack of congruity with the natural world, which is what every shaman will tell you, the reason why we are in the terrible state that we're in. So we need to work with it differently. So let's look at something called power loss, which is a reason for imbalance that you find defined in many different cultural environments. And power loss is an experience that people have that is often indicated by things like anxiety or kind of recurring low-grade headaches, low level chronic fatigue, low level attention problems, difficulty focusing. Often a string of bad luck will indicate some type of power loss. These are the kinds of symptoms that someone would come to a shaman in a traditional setting and ask for help with. And or often there may be other types of symptoms as well, but it's not limited to that. So if a shamanic practitioner perceived that a person was experiencing power loss, they would do a power retrieval. And power loss is defined as the experience of being exposed to something negative over time. So for instance, if you have a critical parent, or if you have a boss who's undermining, or if you have an internal voice that is unkind, or if you live with a chronic disease, or if you live in a constant state of poverty or ill health, these kinds of things can create power loss, and they can have the symptoms, that power loss can have the symptoms that I mentioned. So in a traditional setting, a shamanic practitioner perceiving that a person is suffering from power loss would journey. They would drum and they would connect with a helping spirit that they have a relationship with, who understands the nature of power loss and can help the shamanic practitioner find the source of power that is needed for this person in order to heal. And that search for that source of power would take place within the shamanic journey. So the practitioner would go as the drums are beating, and they would go to their guide or their teacher and they would say, what is the source of power that is needed in order to heal this person? And then through the journey, they would move through this inner cosmography that we have talked about and that we will explore more fully over the weekend. And the practitioner would be shown the source of power, which might be an animal, it might be a gemstone, it might be a body of light or a body of water. And the shamanic practitioner would bring back that source of power and offer it to the person who's suffering from power loss. Now, in a traditional setting, that would be the end of the healing. It's a very beautiful ceremony where the person there's this drumming, and there's, plants often are being burned that are clarifying in nature, and there's a process of blowing the power back in to the person that's part of the ceremony. Is all based on the journey. And that would be the end of the healing, and the person would have faith in the shaman's capacity to provide the power that's needed, because the shaman has been working for a long time, generally speaking, within a community, and the efficacy of their healing is known. So that's it. Now, in a applied shamanic setting, we might do all of that, but we would do all of that. But we would also have a process, which is an adaptation from hypnotherapy, where we would help guide the person into a connection while they're in an altered state of awareness that's induced through hypnosis, where they would connect with that source of power themselves. And we have a series of questions that we would have them ask that source of power about how to integrate that power into their life. And then the healing would be complete. Now, the reason we do this in applied shamanism, where we have the person connect directly with that source of power, is because we are living in this society where there are so many people who have gotten disconnected from their primary sources of power, which are fundamentally belonging to the earth. And we need them to own their connection with their own sources of power rather than rely on someone else to mediate that power for them. I mean, this is one of the big reasons, all of you know, that people get into trouble because with spiritual communities, because you have leaders who insist on being the mediator between a person's power and themselves. For instance, in the Catholic Church, you can't encounter God without going through a priest. So, you know, what we're trying to do with applied shamanism is return that connection to what could be called the divine, but it's the source of power that belongs to them, and have them mediate that source of power and learn how to integrate it into their lives so that they are not dependent on someone else's capacity to understand power. And this is very important because, again, we see in the modern environment so many abuses of power in spiritual and community environments, that the more you can access your own power, mediate your own power, the more empowered you will be. And the whole point of applied shamanic practice is the empowerment of the individual. This is not something that is necessarily a priority in more traditional societies, when you can have someone who is known to have integrity manage the relationship with power. And so we have a different circumstance. So we address that with this adaptation of the traditional power retrieval. And in depth hypnosis, we take that even further, where we help the client connect with that power directly from the beginning through a hypnotherapeutic process. Well, I'll talk about that another time. So I'd like to talk about another form of imbalance that you find defined in a lot of different shamanic environments, which is considered to be a primary reason for symptoms such as post-traumatic stress types of symptoms, flashbacks, nightmares, severe attention and learning problems, different types of sort of not exactly bipolar, but you know, you're one way one minute and one way the next, like mood swings. And this is, from a shamanic perspective, a result of soul loss. And soul loss is something that occurs when someone is exposed to trauma. And this can be your house burning down. It can be you're in a car accident. It could be you had a surgery. It could be from being mugged, from being raped, from being screamed at if you're of a tender age. You can have the part of you that can get away from the trauma, gets away from the trauma. And that is called a soul part. And when people go into shock, like if you've ever been in an accident, a car accident, or been with someone who has been, you notice they are a little bit shocky. From a shamanic perspective, that's because the soul part that could get away, got away and has not returned. And when the person comes out of shock, that is considered that the soul part has returned. Now, what can happen, however, is the soul part may not return. And that's why you have the symptoms of soul loss. And that's why you have that telegraphing back of the trauma from that soul part that may still be caught in the environment of the soul loss, the trauma, which is why you have the PTSD and the flashbacks. So from a shamanic perspective, the task is to do a soul retrieval. And again, the soul retrieval is accomplished through something called a ceremony called a soul retrieval, which is based and accomplished through the shamanic journey. And in this case, the practitioner journeys to a guide that is known to them, a compassionate spirit who is known to them, and asks the spirit, where is the soul part that belongs to this person? And the helping spirit will show the practitioner where the soul part is. And in a ceremony, the practitioner will bring it back and offer it to that person. And again, in a traditional setting, that's the end of it. And again, people can trust the integrity of the practitioner, and they can allow that practitioner to do the heavy lifting on these deep internal personal issues for them, because there is an understanding of the person's capacity. And the society is fairly intact, and there's not the demand that everyone become as empowered as they can. And in traditional settings, that is all fine. Now, in the modern setting, of course, we have the same issue, where people need to be connected with their own sources of power, in this case, the soul part that has been returned. And again, we have a hypnotherapeutic process where we have the person connect with the soul part and ask certain questions about how to integrate the soul part back into their lives. And again, this gives the person more empowered experience of their own healing. And again, when you have, the thing that I know as a teacher, the more empowered your students, the more likely they are to bring forward their gifts in the world, to take risks, to offer their gifts to the world, and to meet their full potential. And this is something that we need from everyone right now. We need everyone doing this. And so when we're working with these healing practices, and when we're working with the journey, we are always working with that idea in applied shamanic practice. And this is where the kinds of questions and the kinds of processes that we engage in through the journey and through the healing practices that are based on the journey are quite modern. And this is actually where applied shamanism meets Buddhist practice, because the idea of the evolution of the self, the evolution of consciousness, the process of becoming more empowered, which is often called becoming more enlightened in Buddhism, is a modern enterprise. You don't see this in traditional shamanic practice. Shamans are working to develop relationships with helping spirits to be able to accomplish tasks that have been assigned to them or that they have taken on in order to serve the community. And they become more intelligent or more wise in that process. But the idea of the evolution of the self and the removal of internal obstacles that would keep one from being fully empowered is not a shamanic idea. It's a Buddhist idea. And in applied shamanism, we bring the two of them together so that the journey practice, and I'll show you this tomorrow and on Sunday, becomes a process of working with a guide to address long-standing issues, such as issues around, addictions, issues around anger, issues around any kind of an obstacle that would keep you from being happy, relationship issues. And I teach you how to form questions that are effective. And I teach you how to interpret the answers, which is fundamental. Because the journey takes place within the language of image. It's the same language as dreaming. And the way to interpret the answers to questions within journeys is very similar to the process of understanding dreaming and being able to interpret dreams. And we spend a lot of time in the Shamanic Journey class showing you the connection between the dream world and the journey world, and helping you develop a more internally alive space where you can address issues that you may not have been able to get at in any other way. And you can see, for instance, with soul loss, that's something that's very difficult to get at. You know, this is a very subtle experience that is immediately and effectively addressed with shamanic practice. And power loss is very similar as well. You just kind of have this kind of indeterminate sense of fatigue or loss or confusion. And it's identified and addressed with shamanic practice, because all shamanic practice departs from and returns to subtle experience. And although we have many wonderful forms of healing in the Western medical lexicon, there are not strong, we don't have a strong suit in working with energy medicine type processes, the subtle processes that are at the heart of shamanic practice, the work with spirit, the work with energy, and the work with subtle energies. And so this work, shamanic work, is very, very supportive to medical types of interventions, and can be very helpful. Say, you know, for instance, doing a soul retrieval for someone who's had surgery can be very powerful. People heal much more quickly if they've suffered soul loss as a result of the surgery. They will heal much more quickly with the soul retrieval, because their body will heal, but their spirit may not. And this is why we have these wonderful practices from shamanic practice that are geared toward and focused on the healing of the spirit. And they all take place within the context of the shamanic journey, or within the vision of the psychotropic plants. All right, so let me take a minute and take some questions. Anyone have any questions?
Okay, so we do have just one sitting in the Q&A at the moment, but I'm sure we'll get a few more for you. So this is from Laura, and Laura, I apologize, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but she is super excited, feels a huge calling to this kind of work. Her question, though, is she was asking what shamanic work and hypnosis and dream work can bring to our current time.
Everything. So the question, do you need me to repeat the question? No. Okay, so what can shamanic work, hypnosis, and dream work bring to the modern time? The main gifts that all of them bring are a connection with the larger sense of self. That, and you know, as I mentioned, the conscious mind is very helpful in helping us navigate a complex environment. But we often will suppress aspects of ourselves in order to be able to, quote, function in a, quote, rational way. And when we lose sight of those parts of our experience that we suppress or repress, we become sick, and we become disordered. And when you have all three, dreaming, hypnosis, and the shamanic journey, are different ways of moving into the larger self in order to be able to recover the aspects of our experience that we may have repressed in an effort to remain, quote unquote, organized in conscious mind reality. So these gifts are profound. And I can tell you, having worked in this area with people for, you know, decades, there is nothing more organizing for someone than to be able to remember who they are and to be able to remember their experience. And all of these processes offer that possibility. Right. I would really recommend taking the journey class so that you can find this out for yourself. You know, you can, I mean, it's one thing for me to talk about it, but it's another thing to experience it, right? And the class is starting tomorrow, so come on over.
Mm-hmm. So yes, I will be sure to provide links for that tomorrow in the chat as we continue on. And I've got another question if you're good to take a few more. All right. So this person is curious about lucid dreaming and shamanic work in the lucid dreaming state, if you wanted to expand on that.
Sure. So lucid dreaming is a process of becoming aware of the fact that you're dreaming. And it's almost like you're waking up within the dream, and you are aware of yourself within the dream. You're aware of your waking self within the dream. And when you're doing shamanic journeying, you also have a level of awareness of your experience. And but the big difference between lucid dreaming and, well, some forms of lucid dreaming, a lot of forms of lucid dreaming are all about controlling the dream, refocusing the experience of the dream, changing the outcome of the dream. That's a practice for as far as it goes. It's fine. It's a way of developing capacity in an altered state. But in the shamanic journey, the task is to be aware and awake, but you are always being awake within the altered state. But the reason that you're doing that is because you're trying to understand what the guides, the helping spirits, the teachers are showing you. You're not trying to control anything. And the only thing you're trying to do is to be able to receive instruction properly from the helping spirits and to be able to receive information. So in both, you have a level of awareness within the what would normally be considered a unconscious or beyond conscious mind reality state, but the goal is quite different in both. One is to learn how to be more directive, and one is to learn how to be more like a sous chef, taking instruction.
All right, we've got another one here. Aaron is asking, what is your opinion on accessing spirit guides and shamanic healing through meditation versus the need to drum or rattle to create the trance required state?
Well, you certainly could access guides, through a meditative process. The big issue, that I have, and why I like, I had a daily meditation practice since 1970, and I've had a daily journey practice since 1975. Right, so I know both very well, and I teach classes in meditation. So I know, I'm just telling you, I know about this. In case you didn't know that I know. But I'm getting ready to say something quite particular, which is why I'm offering you this. It's not because I'm trying to brag or anything, but I think my perspective is well informed. And I think that when you are connecting with spirit guides through a disciplined practice of the shamanic journey, working with the sonic driver, where you have a definite intention that you are going to a particular place in non-ordinary reality with a particular goal, and you are going to request guidance on that goal and return in a similar way in which you came, and then come back and sit with the answer, and then learn and contemplate on how to apply the answer into your life in a kind of disciplined way. You have a disciplined practice, and you could certainly do that with meditation. But the big issue that can happen with meditation is that you don't know where you are in non-ordinary reality. And this is why I do like working with the inner cosmography of the three worlds, because you are working with a map, and you know who or what you are encountering when you encounter spirits. One of the things that I see in a lot of practices where there's no effort to distinguish between helping spirits and spirits with agendas is that people get everything from confused to entangled inappropriately with other forms of energy that can cause them harm. So one of the things, so again, this is where shamanism and Buddhism meet each other in the way that I teach, because I bring the discipline of Buddhist practice to the shamanic method of working. And I think that it is a really good combination, because there are too many people who don't have good practice instruction in terms of meditation, in terms of being able to perceive and how to work with their mind as they move through the different layers of shamatha and vipassana meditation. And they aren't aware of the larger environment of the spirit world that exists in non-ordinary reality, that is truly only defined in different shamanic practices and in tantric practices too. But you have to meditate for a long time to get there. And so, I mean, certainly you could do anything you wanted. You don't have to have sound, but I really like working with sound because it provides a container for the work. You have 10 minutes of drumming, that's what you're doing. And a lot can happen in those 10 minutes. And one of the things that I see happening with meditation is meditation can get unfocused for people, and they may not have a particular question in mind, or they may not have a disciplined vipassana practice where they know how to perceive what's arising and know how to question what's arising. There's not good instruction on that. So I like this. I like my method. But you can do anything you want.
All right. So we've got one more if you wanted to take a couple
Sure.
more questions. All
Sure.
right. So this person asked, are there some people who cannot learn to journey themselves? If anyone can journey, what would you recommend if someone has tried for years to learn but hasn't been able to do it?
Well, if you've been trying to learn by yourself, you may need a teacher. Sometimes a lot of people can learn to journey by themselves, listening to a book or listening to a program. But you might need a teacher because again, there's, certain things that are just difficult to know when you haven't been working in an altered state. And again, our educational system doesn't have shamanism 101, in fourth grade, we don't have that. And so I would recommend working with the teacher and working with a process like applied shamanism, where you are looking at, okay, I'm not connecting with guidance, or depth hypnosis. I'm not connecting with guidance. Is there a larger reason for that? And how do we address that? Like just getting help with that, because we all have different relationships to our core power, and those relationships can be unknown to us, and we need help discerning it. So I would recommend getting a good teacher that would help you.
All right, and we've got one more if you're okay with it.
Sure.
And again, I apologize, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. It's somebody wondering, they've had a few shamanic experiences before. They're wondering how to integrate that into their current city life. They've also had some past life experiences, and they were looking for a teacher. So maybe what is the best way of going about to find a teacher?
So in terms of integrating your experience from the shamanic journey into your everyday city life, the way that I would do that is I would have a regular journey practice. So if you journey once a week or twice a week or every day, and I would ask questions that are based on your experience in your daily life. So for instance, let's say you have a repeating pattern in relationship where you think you're in a relationship where the person is committed, and then all of a sudden they're gone, and it happens again and again and again. So then you might want to ask in your journey practice, what am I not seeing? Like what problem do I have with discernment? Is there something I'm not discerning? Or do I have a particular attachment to things being a particular way that blinds me to seeing how things really are? Those kinds of questions that you would ask in the journey, and then receive information from your guides or your helping spirits about that. And then you would apply that into your everyday life. So that would be the way that you would integrate it. And then also another thing that's very important in shamanic practice is that, if you're living in a city, of course it's wonderful, but you need to find a way to connect with the earth on a regular basis so that you don't lose track of the natural world and the power of the natural world. And, that can be having a balcony with a whole bunch of plants on it, you know. So then in terms of past lives, of course, if you've had experiences with past lives that have come to you spontaneously, it's very helpful to, again, try to understand how that experience in the past life is related to your experience in this lifetime. And that's a way that you can integrate it. And in depth hypnosis, we have a huge emphasis on past life regression, prenatal regression, age regression, and even Bardo state regression work, where we help people move into the experience of their past lives or their perinatal experience. We help them perceive it, understand it, identify it, and then we generally offer some sort of healing process that would help them integrate that experience into their everyday life. And then we have a process called insight inquiry, which helps them integrate it further when they're in a conscious mind state. So if you're interested in past lives, I do recommend depth hypnosis as a vehicle for understanding them and for working with regression therapy with past lives. It's very powerful. It also, of course, brings in a very practical and real grounded way, the understandings from Buddhist practice around reincarnation. So there you go.
All right. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So I just want to take a quick chance here to, again, say that Isa will be teaching for this weekend. So she'll be here Saturday and Sunday. At the moment during this class, we do have registration at 15% off. So now is a great time to get in and do that. And we will also provide that link in the chat, as well as a donation link for Menla if you feel so inclined. We would always appreciate that. We will also post Isa's Sacred Stream website in the chat as well, so you'll have access to a lot of her material. Isa, was there anything you wanted to add before we move on with questions, or?
No, that's really helpful. Yeah, that was really helpful.
Great. So we have somebody asking, what are your thoughts on drumming for yourself versus using a recording of someone else drumming when journeying alone?
I think it's really a personal thing. Some people find that they are able to focus better in the journey when they're drumming themselves, and other people find that they focus much better when someone else is drumming. And we do actually have a free MP3 download that's part of the class this weekend, so you can try out both. But it's a very personal thing.
All right, and then we've got, can we learn to practice to heal others remotely?
Absolutely. One of the things that is fundamental to shamanic practice is the fact that it is non-local. And that means that you do not have to be in the same room as the person that you are healing, or even on the same continent, because you're working energetically. Again, remember, you're working on the subtle level of experience where time and space do not have the same constructs. And so we focus extensively on learning how to do things, especially now, doing things with distance healing. I'm teaching a class in depth hypnosis right now where we're doing a total focus on distance learning, and it can be very, very powerful. And we really are outside of the constructs of time and space when we're working shamanically, and it is totally effective.
All right, great, thank you. And then in addition to a regular journeying practice, what else would you consider important? Are there any books, any other teachers who have taught you, any influences?
Just in terms of developing a spiritual practice beyond a daily journey practice, So, I mean, I think what I would recommend is going where your interest lies. Um, any type of a daily spiritual practice is going to expand your awareness. And so if you, if you really enjoy reading, I would really recommend finding authors whose work you feel speaks to you and maybe reading a chapter every day. And in terms of developing connections with teachers, there are wonderful teachers that are so accessible now. It's amazing to, to work with different teachers online. And again, I would go where your interest is drawn. Um, and in terms of learning how to work with others or to use your spiritual practice to serve others, I would ask that question in journaling and in journeying, so that you can bring your practice more fully into the world. And everyone has something special to offer, and it's a matter of discovering what that is and then doing everything that you can to support yourself on a spiritual level so that you can be supported on other levels in order to manifest it, right?
Great. And then kind of a follow-up question there was, how do you become comfortable enough with a teacher or a healer to journey with them?
Okay, so what's really important, and you're talking about a teacher in non-ordinary reality? I need to get that clarification. You're talking about a teacher or guide or a helping spirit in non-ordinary reality, or are you talking about a teacher in ordinary reality?
The question they posted was just journeying with the teacher. I would assume that it would be with a physical teacher,
Okay.
but
Okay.
the question
Okay.
didn't specify.
Okay. Well, if that's not the case, just ask the person to specify. So
Both is the clarification.
what? Sorry.
They just popped another question in the Q&A, and they said both in physical
Okay.
reality and
Okay.
non-ordinary reality.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is a very important question, and for both. But in terms of how do you trust a teacher to help you learn how to journey and help you develop these important internal connections with internal teachers, I would really look to the person's integrity. I would look to their to what their intention is. If they're, are they interested in helping you, or are they interested in having you help them? Right? Are they interested in, talking at you, or are they interested in listening to you? These are the kinds of questions that you would ask. And you have to really go with your gut. You have to really trust, what your sense is. And the good news is, let's say you think this person is the right teacher for you and you have a class with them, or you study with them privately, and then you realize they're not the person for you. Not a big deal. You just move on, right? So that's important to remember, that you don't have to stay with a bad teacher. Now, in terms of, how do you trust enough to be able to connect with an internal teacher? You do need to have a good, strong teacher who's holding space for you externally. But the important thing to remember is that the relationship that you have with your helping spirits or your guides and your teachers that you encounter internally is entirely yours. And you have to be willing to listen and take advice and counsel from your guides, and test it to see if it works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, then it's probably not the guide for you, right? So I would say it's a matter of experience. I would let yourself experience things. You can't always know at the outset exactly, is this exactly the right thing? You can go with the sense of things and move into it, knowing that you can always change. And again, the questions that I would ask: does this person or does this helping spirit have my highest good as their priority? That's a question that you would always be able to come back to, and hopefully get an answer yes. Keep to be with that teacher.
Great, thank you. So with 5 minutes left, We can either do a few more questions, or if Isa, you wanted to mention anything.
Um, well, I'm really excited about being able to teach the Shamanic Journey class online this weekend with you. We're going to be working in such a way so as not to get you too tired from being online for long periods of time. We're going to work in like 2-hour, 2.5-hour chunks, and you're not going to be looking at a screen the whole time. We're going to be actively journeying. So it's there'll be a movement from screen time to non-screen time. So a lot of times people are concerned about spending a lot of time online, and you don't really have that problem here. And we're going to be, when we're working together, I'm going to be presenting lecture, and then I'm going to be offering you an instruction on a practice, and then we're going to do the practice, and then we're going to share it with one other person, and then we're going to have Q&A. And we do that over and over again. So we're going to do that probably 6 times, so that by the end of the weekend, you should be able to maintain a journey practice on your own. And you may need a little support, and often we have homework groups that grow out of the classes, and you can connect with a homework buddy and connect with each other on a regular group of people, so that you're journeying together. We also have at the Sacred Stream, we have support classes as well. And so I think that, if you are interested, and sounds like many of you have tried to journey before or have a journey practice, but just kind of need a little brush up. If you think that, or if you're just looking to establish a journey practice, I really recommend coming to this class, because it will give you a structure. Well, I'm really, I see some of the shortcomings with the way that shamanism is taught these days, in that it doesn't have good structures. It doesn't have, step by step opening or flowering of skill sets. And I really do try to do that, so that people feel that they can own the process completely. So, it might help you to either establish skills or reconfigure your skills so that they're more supportive to you. So, that would be the benefit of the class, I think, this weekend. And we certainly welcome you. And the wonderful thing is of course, we're not at the beautiful land of Menla, but we're all in places that are far flung, where we might not have been able to even get to Menla, and we can still study together. So there's a real advantage to that. And, I so appreciate everything that Menla is doing to make this work available, and to make consciousness work available in general. It's important, and we all need to come together and create a sense of stability and clarity to help ourselves and to help those around us get through these times. And certainly, I know myself, my own practice of the Shamanic Journey is fundamental in helping me with that. So happy to be able to offer it to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We were so excited to have had you here, and we are so grateful that because of these circumstances, you are now available, globally. You can get to everybody with this computer system. So thank you so much for continuing to do your work.
Well, thank you.
And we're so excited for this weekend too. I've had the pleasure of being in a few of your classes, and I am always amazed at what you are able to teach and what you share so brilliantly. So I would again recommend to everybody here, if you enjoyed this free portion of this program, definitely sign up for this weekend. It will be even more in depth, and you will learn just an incredible amount.
And if you sign up now, you get 15% off.
And you get the 15% off. So again, I will post that link in the chat as we leave you here. You will have to copy and paste the link. It is not a hyperlink, just so everybody is aware. And I will also post a link, which again, copy and paste, to Menla's donation page, which we are always very appreciative for. And I will also post the Sacred Stream site as well, so you can find your way over to Isa's channel. Right.
There's lots of articles there too that, might help you make a decision.
All right. So that will end our program for the evening. And thank you, everybody who attended. And Isa, thank you very much for making this possible.
Very welcome. Thank you.
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa membership community. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit tibethouse.us. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.